you to please keep your microphone muted unless speaking. Should I hear any inadvertent background noise, I'll request that the member mute microphones. To insert a document into the record, please have your staff email it to documentstni@mail.house.gov. Before we proceed with our opening statements, I'd like to recognize the new vice chair of the subcommittee, Mr. Chris Pappas of New Hampshire. He represents the 1st District in New Hampshire. And although that's a lot different from Las Vegas, we do share a Greek heritage. So I look forward to working with him and know that he will bring his expertise to this role on the subcommittee. So thank you and welcome, Congressman Pappas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to be on board.
We'll now proceed with the opening statements. So I will welcome everybody to today's hearing. Thank you for the witnesses for being with us and thank you for your patience. I also saw in the news that the president intends to nominate Alejandra Castillo for the position of Assistant Secretary for Economic Development at the Commerce Department. So this committee will look forward to working with her when she's confirmed. The topic for today's hearing is the Congressional Reauthorization of the Economic Development Administration. It was created in 1965 by the Public Works and Economic Development Act, and it's the only federal agency specifically dedicated to supporting economic development. The EDA administers a variety of grants programs that invest in public works projects, higher education research and initiatives, planning and technical assistance, economic adjustment, and trade assistance for firms and businesses. The agency also hosts a number of funding opportunities to invest in innovation and technology, such as the Build to Scale program and Scaling Pandemic Resilience through Innovation and Technology, or Sprint Challenge. These programs support distressed communities and strengthen local economies by creating and retaining jobs, mitigating hardship created by dislocation of industry, assisting economic recovery from disasters, and fostering innovation and entrepreneurship. This agency doesn't always make the headlines. A lot of people don't even know it exists, but the statistics show just how impactful it can be in spurring economic growth and helping communities rebound. Since 2012, the EDA has invested nearly $1.9 billion in 4,700 projects all around the country. The EDA estimates that these investments are expected to create or retain over 360,000 jobs and attract over $42 billion in private investment. The EDA awards grants based on its core investment priorities. Earlier this month, the agency updated those priorities to include a focus on equity, technology-based economic growth, and environmentally sustainable development. I applaud the EDA for demonstrating a commitment to addressing the issues facing our country, and through reauthorization, I hope we can work together to create more opportunities for Americans. For many communities, the EDA's grant programs are often the only source of funding available for infrastructure or workforce development projects. The EDA, though, has operated without authorization since 2008. Although Congress, recognizing the importance of its critical mission and impacts, has constantly provided appropriations every year so that the agency can continue to carry out its work promoting innovation and competitiveness to prepare regions across the country for growth and success in the 21st century. This is a big moment, for the EDA. Reauthorization represents an opportunity to invest in workforce development and innovation. Together, we can make regions outside of the established tech hubs more competitive. We can help bring high-speed internet to millions of Americans, and we can create employment opportunities and infrastructure projects for communities that have been historically underserved. The EDA also plays an important role in helping communities recover from disaster. Within the federal government's natural disaster recovery framework, the EDA serves as a coordinating agency for the economic recovery support function on behalf of the Department of Commerce. A critical component of disaster recovery is bringing back jobs and ensuring that disaster survivors have the resources necessary to get back up on their feet after their lives have been upended. The effects of the pandemic on employment have been staggering. A year ago, approximately 20 million Americans were out of a job. That's the most since the Great Depression. And there's been significant progress in putting Americans back to work, but still almost 5 million people remain unemployed in the US today. Last month, the EDA reached the milestone of awarding $1 billion of economic adjustment assistance that was appropriated by Congress through the CARES Act. That's a noteworthy achievement, but with the $3 billion Congress provided to the EDA and the Rescue Act, there's still a lot more work that we can do. The American Rescue Plan appropriation included $750 million as a set aside for communities that have experienced employment and GDP losses in the travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation industry. Considering the devastating economic losses in those sectors, I'm particularly interested in hearing EDA's plans for administering that funding. This is the first time that's ever been done. I believe the EDA can play a vital role in helping diversify the economies in places like Las Vegas that have been so dependent on travel and tourism, so we can better manage the next pandemic. As we work toward advancing the first EDA reauthorization in over a decade, or almost two, I hope our witnesses can share some of their experiences with EDA's programs to better inform our dialogue about the agency's future needs and capabilities. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle on this comprehensive EDA reauthorization that will build on its successes and promote sustainable and equitable economic development in communities of all sizes across the country. At this point, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record of today's hearing a letter from the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and a document from the Economic Development Administration's Stakeholder Coalition entitled EDA Reauthorization Priorities for the 117th Congress. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize and call on the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Webster, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Titus. It's great to be here, and there's some important issues involved in this hearing. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here and joining us for this hearing. As you know, the EDA has received a significant, you mentioned it, significant amount of supplemental funding in recent years to help communities recover from disasters. Over the last year alone, EDA received $1.5 billion from the Bipartisan CARES Act and another $3 billion from the American Rescue Plan. These amounts are significantly above the level of EDA receives in base funding. So it is important that we ensure EDA is positioned to properly manage these taxpayer dollars in the most efficient ways. Ultimately, in many rural communities across the nation, access to broadband internet remains a major hurdle to retaining and attracting businesses and jobs. In cities with high-speed broadband options, many take broadband for granted. However, in many parts of my district and in places all over the country, meaningful access is just not available. This lack of broadband is, in many areas, especially rural areas, is a serious impediment to many facets of American life, including economic development. Just about every business these days needs access to broadband internet. It may not be the first thing that comes to mind, but agriculture business today rely heavily on broadband for things like operations, maintenance, weather forecasting, and sales. Technology has created a huge opportunity for farming to be more efficient, and supporting growth in our agriculture communities ensures maintaining food security for our nation. We also know that broadband impacts the ability of distressed communities to attract jobs and businesses across a host of other industries, including healthcare and energy sectors. While EDA can and does fund some broadband projects, we must ensure any unnecessary hurdles are addressed so we can help more Americans get connected. Lastly, I want to make sure that those efforts to achieve this goal do not harm existing rural broadband providers, which often are small businesses themselves and have spent capital and time trying to reach these communities, often in creative ways. So I look forward to the hearing from our witnesses and for these and other issues. Thank you, Chair Titus. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Today, we're going to be hearing testimony from witnesses on 2 panels. Each panel will be followed by questions from the members. I'd now like to welcome the witness on our first panel, Mr. Dennis Alvard, who is the Acting Assistant Secretary for Economic Development at the U.S. Department of Commerce. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to hearing your testimony. Without objection, our witness's full statement will be included in the record. So since your written testimony will be made a part of the record, the subcommittee requests that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. Mr. Alvard.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Chairwoman Titus, Ranking Member Webster, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Economic Development Administration. EDA's mission is to lead the federal economic development agenda by promoting innovation and competitiveness, preparing American regions for growth and success in the worldwide economy. EDA's creation over 50 years ago has provided tens of thousands of catalytic grants to state and local governments, nonprofits, economic development districts, institutes of higher education, tribal entities, and other organizations to help communities create jobs and generate private investment across the country. EDA grants support many of the country's most economically distressed areas, including regions that are recovering from economic shocks, like those experienced by coal and nuclear power plant communities, or other communities impacted by the decline of an important industry. EDA, through its organic statute, the Public Works and Economic Development Act of 1965, provides targeted investments that address a range of economic development needs, including research, planning, technical assistance, and construction and implementation projects. Using this flexible, comprehensive set of tools, EDA helps regions bounce back from economic setbacks and position themselves for long-term, sustainable economic growth. Since EDA was last authorized in 2004, the economic conditions that communities face have changed and evolved. Over the last 17 years, new industries have emerged while other sectors have declined. Regions have encountered and responded to devastating natural disasters, and we've all suffered the impacts of a global pandemic. EDA has also evolved. The Bureau has improved its business practices to be more responsive to its customers, launched new evaluation tools and economic models, and over the past 4 years, grown exponentially in size and budget. In 2017, EDA had an annual appropriation of $276 million. In 2018 and 2019, through 2 disaster recovery supplementals, EDA's budget authority grew to $901.5 million and $904 million respectively. In 2020, Congress provided the agency a historic influx of $1.5 billion under the CARES Act. Less than 1 year later, EDA has received an additional $3 billion in funding under the American Rescue Plan of 2021. This growth in appropriations has also resulted in rapid growth in EDA's headcount. Thanks to the additional hiring authorities EDA received under the CARES Act, we successfully solicited and reviewed over 3,000 resumes and onboarded 83 staff. These new staff have helped EDA obligate over 2/3 of the funding within 1 year of Congress enacting the CARES Act, and has EDA well positioned to obligate the $3 billion from the American Rescue Plan by the September 30, 2022 deadline. Notably, since our last reauthorization, EDA has been recognized for our work in disaster recovery as the lead in economic recovery under the National Disaster Recovery Framework, leadership in federal resource integration and collaboration, and the creation of robust regional innovation programs to continue to grow as authorized by the America Competes Act. What hasn't changed for the last 55 years is EDA's continued ability to rise to the challenge and ensure the funds entrusted to us are invested in equitable, fair, and impactful manner, and that we are reaching the communities most in need of our assistance. We are proud of the Bureau's accomplishments and believe that we can expand our work to assist distressed communities, especially in the current economic climate. EDA's investments are highly effective and generate significant impacts. As reported by SRI International in a 2017 study, EDA makes a substantial number of investment infrastructure grants directly to organizations and communities across the nation to support projects to improve roads, highways, water supplies, and other critical infrastructure components. In many situations, EDA funds act as the primary catalyst for other funding. That is, without support and funding of EDA, many projects would struggle to attract the necessary capital. EDA grants act as a signaling mechanism to validate the project and mobilize outside investment. Looking at EDA infrastructure investments, SRI International's analysis found that for every dollar EDA invested, 17.5 in additional private investment dollars were generated. The same study also found that EDA-supported projects and the investment they attracted generated an average of an additional 56,554 jobs, 3.187 billion in wages and salaries, and 4.053 billion in personal income each year. While EDA has been exceedingly successful in implementing its programs, our rapid growth in recent years and the ever-shifting economic development landscape means we must constantly reassessing how we meet the challenges of the future. As such, we must broaden our horizon with an eye towards 21st century technologies and sectors that our communities will need to access if they want to be competitive moving forward. Chairwoman Titus, Ranking Member Webster, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. Restoring economic prosperity to all parts of the nation is an important priority of the administration, and EDA is well positioned to leverage its strengths in furtherance of this goal. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We'll now move on to the members' questions. Each member will be recognized for 5 minutes, and I'll start by recognizing myself. I would like to talk to you, Mr. Secretary, about the new set aside for communities that have been so hard hit by the drop in tourism. We know that that was just devastated by the pandemic. People were not traveling. They couldn't go anywhere. They didn't feel like being on holiday. 65% of total unemployment last year was in that hospitality, travel, and tourism sector. Now, we set aside 25% for economic adjustment assistance for those communities. And I wonder if you could tell us kind of where you are in the process of getting that money out, setting up regulations. Is there anything else we need to do to help you move that along and make that work the way it was intended?
Thank you, Chairwoman. We unquestionably see the opportunity of assisting this particular industry sector. And as you mentioned previously, it has not been traditional for EDA to focus narrowly on a particular industry sector, but as you also mentioned, given the economic impacts from the pandemic, we unquestionably saw that the travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation sectors were among the most adversely impacted as a result of the global pandemic. So we're thankful to have the resources to be able to provide a very targeted approach in this case in addressing those needs. I don't think that there's any additional authorities that we need in order to be able to implement this assistance. We are well along in the program design and hope to be able to soon make that funding available to the broader economic development practitioner community. And we're intending to be incredibly flexible in our use of those funds so that we can meet a broad range of different needs. The impacts to the travel and tourism sector were very widespread, affecting small and large communities alike throughout the entire United States. So we certainly want to be able to ensure that we can meet all of their different needs. And you mentioned before, the importance of helping communities to diversify their economies, and we certainly couldn't agree more. So we hope that we'll be able to put some of this funding to use to help communities do just that, as well as help bring back tourism, recreation, and other activities that have been idle during the pandemic period. So we'll be funding a mix of strategies for recovery, assistance for marketing, to help areas to bounce back quickly, as well as core infrastructure investments to help the industry.
I think flexibility is important, and I've been getting questions about the confusion. Can it be used to promote or advertise or build infrastructure? So the sooner we can get those instructions out, I think the better. People will be very thankful for that. Another question, as we move towards reauthorization, seems to me the need for a codified disaster recovery office at EDA just seems more and more necessary. And this language was included when the House passed the HEROES Act, and I advocated for creating such an office. Could you address that as part of our reauthorization considerations and what capabilities you might see such an office having or performing?
Yes, Chairman, thank you for the question. Unquestionably, disaster recovery has taken over the majority of EDA's portfolio in the last 3 to 4 years, coming on the heels of the natural disasters in 2017 and 2018, and then, of course, the global pandemic. First, I should start by thanking Congress, you and your colleagues, for permitting a small reorganization within EDA, where we were able to align, some of our disaster-related functions within the organization, bringing together our economic development integration and our disaster recovery functions within a singular division. I think that's a good first step. But what we saw is that it was very beneficial for us to be able to aggregate these resources within the Bureau, and we're particularly appreciative of the flexibility that Congress provided to us under the CARES Act and again under the American Rescue Plan to be able to have additional hiring flexibility so that we could act in a more agile manner in responding to these disasters and be able to scale up, bring on staff quickly in order to be able to deploy resources to these hard-hit areas. So we're certainly open to continuing discussions with you about that and other areas that we might build upon to enhance our role in this space.
Thank you. We look forward to working with you on that, because I think that would be something to consider as an improvement as we look at reauthorization. Mr. Webster? I think you need to unmute, Mr. Webster.
How's that?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Alvard, can you explain the different levels of local match under the EDA programs, and what is the process and criteria for EDA to adjust or possibly even waiver those matches?
Absolutely. So for EDA's core programs under the Public Works and Economic Development Act, generally we require a matching component. So, typically that match starts at a 50% match rate. Depending on the levels of economic distress exhibited by the community, and we typically look at factors such as unemployment and per capita income, we do have the ability to go up to an 80% federal share. In the case of Indian tribes, we can go to a 100% share. Now, that's true of our core programs under the Public Works and Economic Development Act. In the case of the supplemental appropriations that EDA has provided, Congress expressly provided authority for EDA to go up to 100%. So what we find is that a lot of the work that we've been doing under those disaster supplementals, the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan, is really occurring at the higher grant levels at 80% and above. And we do have the ability in truly exigent circumstances to be able to waive those matching requirements through our traditional programs as well. Typically, we're looking for some indication that the community has effectively exhausted its taxing and borrowing authority.
Thank you. Okay, just as is with the chair, tourism and travel is important to us. I'm from Florida, and with respect to set aside in that particular area, what approach do you think you'll be taking in order to facilitate that?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, we do want to ensure that we're able to meet a broad and diverse range of needs from across the country. And unfortunately, the funding that was provided under the American Rescue Plan was pursuant to our Economic Adjustment Authority, which is our most flexible authority. It allows us to engage in a wide range of activities, including things like recovery strategies, market feasibility studies. We're able to capitalize locally and regionally administered revolving loan funds, as well as invest in various different types of infrastructure that can enable industries to diversify, bounce back, and grow. And in the case of travel and tourism in particular, we're aware that there is high demand for things like marketing in order to encourage tourism to return to areas that have seen a significant downfall during the pandemic, but as well as infrastructure to diversify the economies of areas that have been highly reliant on a single industry sector, such as tourism. So we fully anticipate making a range of different types of investments.
Mr. Hawkins, how critical is broadband to farmers to keep up with the evolving agriculture industry?
I truly believe that there are no low-tech industries any longer. As we look at the 21st century economy, broadband has become a critically important enabling tool for almost every industry sector. And the pandemic certainly shined a spotlight on that need, where we saw significant demands for broadband in underserved areas in particular. So, and EDA can play a critically important role in helping to address those needs.
Thank you so much. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Ms. Norton, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Alvard, I'm interested that environmentally sustainable economic development is, of course, a priority for your agency, because it is it is also essential for improving our country's competitiveness. EDA is tasked with supporting green, and this is my interest, green or nature-based versions of its traditional grant-based investments. And I'm pleased that your agency recognizes it as a key component of advancing and indeed growing the economy. The benefits of using nature-based approaches to tackle economic and infrastructure challenges are becoming more widespread, and I'm pleased that they are becoming more commonly accepted as good practice for enhancing resilience while creating private sector jobs and spurring innovation. I wonder if you could share with us what steps EDA is taking to ensure its grant awards are supporting sustainable, nature-based economic development, and whether EDA is working with experts to guide these investments.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. I appreciate that very much. This is an area that I feel personally very passionate about. In fact, I came to public service as the agency's first national brownfields coordinator, which of course had a focus on the dual objectives of both spurring economic development, but also ensuring environmental cleanup and environmentally sustainable development. So we've had a long history actually working in the environmentally sustainable development space. We, as I mentioned, have been involved in brownfield revitalization for many years. We also implemented some years ago the Global Climate Change Mitigation Incentive Fund, which focused very much on green buildings and ensuring greater levels of energy efficiency as part of some of our infrastructure development. And now, of course, we have just launched a new investment priority on environmentally sustainable development, and we're taking an even broader approach there. This investment priority will focus on how we can leverage green products, processes, places, and buildings to ensure a more sustainable economy. And As you mentioned, there are significant opportunities in the growing green energy and environmental sector for innovation, commercialization, and future investment to grow our economy. But there are also significant opportunities to leverage improvements in the way that we undertake our development to ensure that it's done in a more sustainable manner. And EDA intends to incentivize exactly those types of investments through this priority.
I note your mention of climate change, which, as far as I'm concerned, should be #1 priority in our country. I wonder if you would elaborate more on the current and perhaps even future impacts of climate change and how you take that into consideration when evaluating applications for public works projects.
Yeah, that's such an important question, and it's something that we've been more and more involved in as we've become more and more involved in disaster recovery work. And it complements, I think, very well another one of our investment priorities, which is economic and environmental resilience. And so when we're looking at helping economies to bounce back and build back more quickly, we want to make sure that we're putting infrastructure in place that's going to be more resilient. And of course, we're also sensitive to the cost of that infrastructure and recognize that there's a significant cost in terms of energy and developing construction materials. Of course, there's embodied carbon within those materials, and we want to make sure that we're building sustainably so that we don't have to deconstruct and reconstruct over and over again to support our economy. So we're certainly very focused on that, both at the front end in terms of the types of investments that we support, but also on the back end in the way that we're implementing those projects.
Thank you very much. My time has expired.
Thank you. Certainly that would be a priority that if you had this special division for disaster mitigation could fit right into.
Absolutely.
I now recognize Mr. Guest for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Secretary, first I want to thank you for being with us today to discuss the importance of the reauthorization of EDA. I was excited to read in your report where you say that we are looking into ways to improve our ability to deliver economic development results in key growing sectors. One such example is broadband, and I know that you spoke on broadband moments ago with Representative Webster. I believe that we have seen, particularly in the world of COVID-19, the importance of high-speed internet for families and individuals. We see individuals who are working from home, who are being educated from home, who are shopping from home, worshiping from home, who are receiving their health care from home through telemedicine. And I also believe that broadband is a key component in economic development, particularly in rural and remote communities. And I would often argue that the deployment of high-speed and reliable broadband is the most important thing that we can do for rural America, whether it be manufacturing, agriculture, small business. High-speed internet, which once was a luxury, is now becoming a necessity. With that in mind, that's why my office was proud to partner with Ranking Member Graves on the eBridge Act, which would expand the capabilities of your agency to provide high-speed broadband development initiatives with existing grant programs. And so I would like, Mr. Secretary, if you will, for just a few moments, if you can expand on the role that EDA plays in broadband development and how the enhancement of legislation like the eBridge Act would better allow EDA to assist our communities.
Thank you, Congressman Guest, for the question. I couldn't agree with you more about the importance of broadband as a critical enabling block for successful economic development. Just in the way that roads and water and sewers and then rural electrification was critically important to enabling our economy in the past, broadband has served that role today. And EDA supports broadband in a variety of different ways. We have done a lot of work supporting planning and market feasibility studies to help communities figure out the best solution for their regions. There's a lot of variability across our diverse country. In some cases, it makes sense to run fiber. In other cases, wireless solutions are more appropriate given the geography. And we can certainly help communities with that aspect of exploring broadband. We've also supported broadband infrastructure, actually helping to bring fiber to communities. We haven't had adequate appropriations to do large investments in trunk lines to bring broadband to previously underserved areas, but we have had some success on a smaller scale, particularly in a business context, being able to support broadband, bringing broadband to an industrial park or a science park, helping to bring broadband, maybe that last mile or at a building scale. I think one of the things that we've found is that unlike more traditional infrastructure, which was based on a kind of public relationship, broadband infrastructure is quite often based on a public-private partnership in order to be able to deploy that. And so this is one area where EDA's authorization statute perhaps has not kept up with traditional times. And we were pleased to provide some technical drafting assistance to the sponsors of the eBridge Act, and we'd certainly be open to continuing to explore what might be most appropriate in the context of a future EDA reauthorization.
Mr. Secretary, thank you again for joining us, and thank you for your continued support for broadband. Please, as there are ways in which we as members of Congress can continue to make sure that we are making broadband available to our rural communities, that we are promoting that economic development, please continue to have an open dialogue with us and let us know what we can do to better partner with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I yield back.
Well, thank you, Mr. Guest. Be sure you keep us up to date with your eBridge bill so we can build some of that into our reauthorization. Sounds like there's a lot of interest in that, a lot of need for it. It'd be very helpful. We now go to Mr. Pappas for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Mr. Alvard, I appreciate your comments and really look forward to working in a bipartisan fashion to realize a reauthorization of EDA, which is so crucial. I want to thank you for all the work that you have done, through this tough time, and I appreciate the attention that you've brought to some of the critical programs here. One of the issues that I hear about when I talk to businesses in my district, especially manufacturers, is challenges around workforce. I mean, we are already seeing in my state of New Hampshire a 3.2% unemployment rate. We know there are more that still have to return to the workforce, but this is going to be a long-term challenge to figure out how we recruit, retain, train the workforce of tomorrow to make sure that we're aligning the skills with the needs of our companies. So I'm wondering if you could offer some thoughts about how EDA can help employers with these necessary efforts to find skilled workers, to help them recruit, and to ensure that they can really reach their full economic potential.
Thank you, Congressman, for your support, and certainly look forward to working with you as well. Workforce is an area that we have seen significant increased demand for EDA assistance over the last several years. And so we have begun to invest more and more heavily in this area. And it's certainly an area that we see receiving some enhanced focus under the American Rescue Plan implementation as well. Over the last year, we had the opportunity for the first time to implement a program that has been on the books and authorized for quite some time under Section 28 of the Stevenson-Weidler Act, or America Competes, called the STEM Apprenticeship Program. And for the first time last year, we received $2 million in appropriations to implement that program, which is not a lot in the context of the greater workforce development needs across the country. But it did give us the opportunity for the first time to have a very targeted competition in this space. And we had a very robust competition that was highly subscribed. And we ended up making 7 awards for that $2 million across a diverse range of applicants. We had an Alaska Native community, a small rural community college, an urban recipient. And so we're very much looking forward to seeing the results of this initial cohort of awardees and what lessons we might take away from that experience that we would be able to scale then in the context of our other programming. Unquestionably, one of the trends that we have seen is that when we are able to align specific industry needs within a region and the workforce training programs, we get much better results. So, and EDA is able to, again, invest in both the hard and the soft infrastructure to support workforce development and training.
Well, terrific. Well, thanks for that. And I'd be interested to hear the impact that $2 million makes for those 7 awardees. And if there's any additional detail on that, please let us know. One final question, I know contained within the proposal that the administration has put out, the American Jobs Plan, it mentions lifting the $3 million infrastructure cap on how much can go to projects. I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on EDA-funded infrastructure projects as they can be a catalyst for economic growth, and what level of investment do you see as necessary to address our infrastructure needs?
Yes, thank you, Congressman, for that question. A great opportunity to clarify on that one. So there is not a statutory cap on any of EDA's programs, neither our public works and infrastructure programs or any of our other programs. I can certainly understand why there may have been a perception that there is a cap, because practically speaking, EDA does entertain a lot of investments in that price range. We have a variety of different types of proposals. They quite often come in the kind of $1.5 to $3 million range. So I can see why there might have been a sense that there was a cap. In essence, it was probably largely driven by the fact that at our appropriation levels, we can only support so many investments at a certain level. What we have seen under the various disaster supplemental appropriations is quite a lot more investment activity at higher levels. And there is, in fact, a significant demand for that type of investment, at the $5, 10, even $15 million infrastructure range.
Well, terrific. Thanks for the clarification on that. Appreciate your work, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Carbajal, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Titus. Across the nation, U.S. nuclear capacity is estimated to fall by 10.5 gigawatts by 2025, the closing of 12 reactors, including the Diablo Canyon nuclear reactors, should I say, in my district. The closure of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant will have a significant economic impact in my region and my district. The power plant currently employs roughly 1,500 individuals with an average salary of $157,000. Many of my constituents are rightfully worried about the job loss that will happen after the closure of the Diablo Canyon power plant. In Congress, I've worked with my colleagues to include over $15 billion to the Economic Development Agency to be able to provide funding for competitive grants and assist communities facing closure of nuclear power plants. I have a 3-part question for you. Can you provide an update on how this funding is being allocated? 2, how is EDA working with communities to create plans to mitigate job loss? And is workforce retraining part of those efforts? And lastly, are there success stories or examples you could share with us on this program? I'm currently exploring ways to continue to support it.
Thank you very much, Congressman, for that question. And this is a newly emerging priority area within EDA's portfolio. We appreciate the additional resources Congress has provided us to do work in this area. As you mentioned, for the last couple of years, we have received dedicated funding to assist communities that have nuclear power plants that have come to the end of their useful life, and they're looking at transitioning their economies into new areas. We have begun to implement that assistance. We developed an allocation algorithm to allocate that assistance out to across the EDA's 6 regional offices, based on a variety of criteria, including, the number of such facilities that they have and the various phases that those facilities are in, as well as various economic distress and other traditional criteria that we look at. And they have begun to reach out to communities and solicit applications for that assistance. The communities are, they're at very different stages. Some have plants that have already closed and they've already faced the economic impacts and the outfall that has resulted from that closure. Others are facing an imminent closure and they're beginning to plan and prepare for that. And for others, that closure may be much further out, but we certainly encourage them to also consider, diversifying their economy. One of the challenges that many of these communities have is that they were not highly diversified. They were very, very focused on the power generation and the resulting supply chain industries. And as a result, when they go away, it does have a very, very significant impact on the economy. Now, we don't have a lot of successes to report in this area to date because we're just beginning our investment activity, but I do think we have a number of relevant and germane examples from work that we've done across other sectors. So for the last several years, EDA has been investing very, very heavily in assistance to coal communities. And many of the characteristics are very similar, where the main industry that the community is reliant upon has changed. Something has changed that undermines the base of the economy, and therefore they need to look at new opportunities to diversify. To your question about workforce has to be part of the equation. It's a critically important building block. And in most cases, what we need to be able to do is work with industry closely to be able to understand what needs they have, what skill sets they are looking to acquire, so that we can then work with community providers to develop systems and training programs that are going to be able to transition the workforce into those new jobs.
Thank you. With the remainder of my time, one of the EDA's new investment priorities is an effort to increase planning or implementation projects that advance equity. How does EDA plan to incorporate equity considerations into its grant programming?
Yes, we have recently revised our investment priorities, and we've made equity our #1 priority, recognizing that it's critically important that we go out of our way to focus our attention on those communities that are most in need of our assistance. And statutorily, we have a focus on economically distressed areas and regions. With the equity priority, we'll be taking a very proactive approach to reaching out to underserved communities, to minority communities that may not have been aware of EDA assistance in the past, and educating them about the resources that are available, and frankly, providing a little bit of extra technical assistance to ensure that they are able to competitively compete for the resources that we have available. And we'll also be considering that as part of our evaluation criteria to make sure that we're getting to those communities. I recently had an occasion to participate as part of a department-run tribal consultation, and I was very struck by hearing many of the tribal leaders comment about the fact that they just weren't familiar with the full panoply of programs that the Commerce Department provides. I think it's really incumbent upon us to be proactive in reaching out to these underserved communities to make sure that they are and can avail themselves of those opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Alvard. I'm out of time. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. You bring up a very good point, though. Maybe some of your staff would be willing to work with our offices to do roundtables or public hearings to inform different communities about the programs that you have available. So we'd like to work with you on that. I think that would, I know my district would benefit from it. So I'm
Chairwoman,
sure.
we would welcome the opportunity. We really would.
Great. All right. We'll work on that. Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Your comments have been very enlightening. We've certainly appreciated your time, and we'll be working with you pretty extensively as we move this reauthorization forward and as we get some of your folks out into the district. We'll add all those comments to the record, and if there are no further questions, I'll now call up panel 2. Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you for having us.
I'd ask the witnesses on panel 2 to please turn their cameras on and keep them on for the duration of the panel. I'd now like to welcome the witnesses on the second panel. Ms. Lisa Cooper is Executive Director of Northern Kentucky Area Development District. Mr. Garrett Hawkins, who's President of the Missouri Farm Bureau. Mr. Jonas Peterson, who is President and CEO of Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance, the Honorable Lenny Eliason, who is a Commissioner in Athens County, Ohio, and Mr. Dan Carroll, who is the Director of the Milken Institute Center for Financial Markets. So thank you all for being with us today. We look forward to hearing your testimony. Without objection, your full testimony will be included in the record. And as with the previous panel, since it is included, the committee would request that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. I'd now like to recognize Mr. Massey, who is connected to our first witness and can give us an introduction to her.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce my friend and Northern Kentucky native, Lisa Cooper. She got her Bachelor of Business Administration at the University of Kentucky and her Master's in Public Administration from Northern Kentucky University. And she's the Executive Director of the Northern Kentucky Area Development District. It covers 8 counties in Northern Kentucky, and it's one of the most prosperous areas of Kentucky. Even though we've been hit by COVID, as everybody else has been hit, it's one of the lowest areas for unemployment. And so I would just like to say in the introduction that I think it's prosperous based in large part on her work and her leadership as the executive director at that area development district. She's worked on community development, human services, and workforce development, which was mentioned in the previous panel. So she has a great perspective, and I welcome her today.
Thank you so much, Congressman Massey, for those kind words. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Nancy. Just a second. Ms. Cooper, okay, now you're recognized and you can proceed for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Chairwoman Titus, Ranking Member Webster, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the U.S. Department of Commerce and Economic Development Administration and its importance to my community, our region, and our country. As Congressman Massey said, my name is Lisa Cooper, and I am the Executive Director of the Northern Kentucky Area Development District. We're a regional planning and development organization based in Florence, Kentucky, and we serve 8 counties and 54 cities. Our core mission is to facilitate economic development and community development efforts in our region and to serve as a regional convener. We have a board that's made up of both local elected officials as well as regional community leaders. In addition, I also serve as a board member of the National Association for Development Organizations, known as NATO, and NATO represents hundreds of organizations like mine that are EDA designated economic development districts across the country. We help deploy federal funding into local projects, support business growth, facilitate both urban and rural planning, and provide community services and technical assistance, and ensure compliance and accountability with a lot of the programs that we work with EDA on. So today I'd like to take a few minutes and share a few examples of the significance of EDA to my community. EDA investments have many important impacts across our region. One example is the recent Eda Sprint Grant that has been received by Northern Kentucky University. This is going to help leverage the university's expertise in data analytics, healthcare, technology, and logistics into a regional incubator and a regional projects. This grant supports innovation and entrepreneurship and does help promote economic diversification throughout our region. Another very different project involved EDA funding through its public works program for Carroll County, which is one of our rural counties, and 3 surrounding rural counties for a regional wastewater treatment plant. This project not only helped mitigate some very concerning environmental hazards for the area, but it has allowed for the consolidation of a number of smaller treatment plants. So this is resulting in things like cost savings, better services to residents and businesses, and has also allowed them to expand their economic development efforts. And then thirdly, I wanted to talk just a little bit about our EDA Revolving Loan Fund. We've operated this program for 24 years, and last year when it was recapitalized, after EDA received some supplemental fund for the CARES Act, this allowed us to provide loans to small businesses to help them stay afloat and stay in business through the COVID-19 pandemic. For all of these reasons, I do want to emphasize the importance of reauthorizing the EDA. But in doing so, I'd also like to ask you to consider making some further enhancements to EDA programs and funding. So first, a very critical component of EDA's investment approach is the EDA partnership planning grants that is provided to economic development districts like mine. These planning grants lay the foundation for subsequent investments into community projects. So in my experience, the basis for successful project implementation begins with a robust and inclusive planning process that promotes regional input. Secondly, I would recommend consideration of amending the Public Works and Economic Development Act of 1965 to specify that EDA investments into high-speed broadband development are eligible uses. NATO did endorse last session the bipartisan e-bridge legislation that Congressman Guest and Chairwoman Titus mentioned earlier, and we would encourage the committee to pursue reforms of this nature that we think could be very beneficial. In reauthorizing EDA, I respectfully request Congress to place some emphasis on increased funding for EDA's Public Works Program, Research and National Assistance Technical Assistance Program, and the Partnership Planning Grants. These funding sources are the most important to organizations like mine, but most importantly, to the communities and the residents that we serve. I would also ask you to consider an overhaul of EDA's economic distress formula to ensure a more inclusive and equitable pattern of investment across the country. Currently, the formula requires communities to invest as much as 50% of the total project cost, and this can be prohibitive. Even for the most underserved and distressed communities, the maximum allowable federal grant at this point is 80%, except in very rare cases. So I would encourage Congress to consider including direction for EDA's economic distress formula to be overhauled, and they can have a more reliable pattern. And finally, I would encourage support for the recommendation made by Eda Stakeholder Coalition, a group of national organizations that have come together in support of EDA's funding and program to increase EDA's annual authorized funding level to $3 billion. EDA's current funding level does not accurately reflect the importance of EDA's role as the leading federal agency with a focus solely on economic development. So in closing, EDA has been a crucial federal partner for my region, and EDA's investments have a proven record of success. I encourage you to support not only the reauthorization, but also the increased funding for the agency. Thank you so much for the opportunity to address you today, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cooper. That was great. Some good suggestions for us to work on in the reauthorization. We'll now go to Mr. Hawkins.
Good afternoon, Madam Titus, Ranking Member Webster, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Garrett Hawkins, and I'm a fifth-generation farmer from Appleton City, Missouri. We live and farm just about 85 miles south of Kansas City, and we're the third generation in our family to operate the farm that we currently live on today. Agriculture runs deep in our family and spans livestock, row crop, and dairy production. I'm a proud husband and father and currently serve as president of the Missouri Farm Bureau. I appreciate the opportunity to provide input on the necessity of rural broadband and its importance to economic development in rural America. Broadband connectivity is critical in stimulating and revitalizing the rural economy. It's essential to modern agriculture, the farmers and ranchers who grow our food, and the quality of life for those of us who live and work in rural America. In Missouri, I see the need for broadband in rural communities every day. One family I know operates a soil lab with customers worldwide. Until recently, they struggled to find an affordable, reliable broadband service. They were paying hundreds of dollars a month for subpar internet. However, with broadband investments made in Missouri, they now have reliable service at the farm and at the lab, which has boosted their global business. Other families I know use online marketing tools to market their products nationwide. Farms and agribusinesses use broadband every day. Last month, I visited a fellow farmer in southern Missouri who was thrilled to see a fiber optic line being installed a few miles from his farm. His comment to me was, maybe they'll come my way in a year or so. In Missouri, we've taken action to bring broadband to rural communities. In 2017, Farm Bureau convened the Missouri Broadband Working Group. Over 120 diverse stakeholders formed recommendations for our governor and congressional delegation. As a result, our governor established a statewide Office of Broadband to keep its finger on the pulse of all things broadband in Missouri. It would not have been established without the collaborative efforts of Farm Bureau, our state departments of Agriculture and Economic Development, and the University of Missouri. We also successfully advocated for the Missouri Broadband Grant Program, which helps providers deploy broadband in unserved and underserved areas. Last year, our legislature passed a bill supported by Farm Bureau allowing community improvement districts and neighborhood improvement districts to facilitate broadband deployment. We have seen recent success with EDA-funded projects in rural Missouri. One community is receiving EDA funds to deploy broadband infrastructure and enhance business and telework capabilities. Many of our regional planning commissions have been able to identify potential projects. 5 of our 19 RPCs are working on EDA-funded broadband deployment projects through the CARES Act. Farmers and ranchers depend on broadband just as they do highways, railways, and waterways. Today, we use precision agriculture tools to reduce the amount of fertilizer we apply to fields, to decide how much water we need to sustain crops, and determine the amount of pesticides to keep our crops healthy. Off the farm, rural communities need access to health care, government services, and educational and business opportunities. As more physicians leave rural communities, telemedicine has become a necessity for our families. In my hometown of Appleton City, I serve on the board of one of the smallest critical access hospitals in the state. The hospital, which my great aunt and uncle founded in the early 1930s, employs over 100 people and is one of our community's largest employers. We work hard to keep our rural hospital thriving and adapting with the latest medical technology. Unfortunately, even though we can find providers for telehealth services, our lackluster internet connection hinders us in providing care. Broadband has also helped revitalize our rural economy and promoted entrepreneurship. Several people now are using connected workspaces along our main street in buildings that were once empty. This lets them stay and contribute to our community while injecting their income into our local economy. Farm Bureau appreciates the subcommittee's interest in rural broadband and the economic viability of our rural communities. Broadband is essential to modern agriculture and our quality of life. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on such an important issue for our members, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hawkins. We appreciate your being here. It's very interesting to hear all the different ways that broadband can make such a difference. It's today what electricity was when it was first invented. You just can't exist without it. I'd now like to welcome Mr. Peterson. Before you start, Mr. Peterson, I'd take just a minute to share your credentials with the committee. Mr. Jonas Peterson is President and CEO of the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance. LVGEA is Southern Nevada's leading economic development organization. Mr. Peterson serves on the boards of a variety of national and local organizations, including as a board member of the Governance Committee of the International Economic Development Council, whom he is representing here today. So welcome. It's nice to see you here, Mr. Peterson. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Chairwoman Titus, Ranking Member Webster, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. My name is Jonas Peterson. I'm the President and CEO of the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance. We're a regional public-private partnership that's focused on diversifying and strengthening the economy here in Southern Nevada. I'm here today on behalf of the International Economic Development Council, which is the world's largest professional trade association representing economic developers and the practice of economic development. During our current crisis caused by COVID-19, IEDC and our 5,000 members have worked tirelessly to provide resources to communities struggling to respond and recover. Over the past 13 months, our families, our communities, economies have all taken a hard hit from the effects of COVID-19. In Las Vegas, our unemployment rate spiked to 34% in April of 2020. That's the highest level ever recorded. Our tourism industry, which accounts for roughly 1 out of every 3 jobs in Southern Nevada has been particularly hard hit. Visitor volume fell by over 55% last year compared to the previous year, and we lost billions from canceled events, trade shows, and conventions. At my organization, revenue fell by over 20% during the pandemic, straining our ability to deliver critical economic development planning and access to business support services during a time of great need. So we applied for our first ever EDA grant in May of 2020. And after nearly a year of review, I'm pleased to say we were finally approved for approximately $300,000 of federal assistance in March of this year. So the review process took much longer than we were expecting. The final amount was about 1/3 of our original application. But I want to say that we are absolutely grateful for the funding. It will fuel a new recovery strategy for our region and boost our critical business support services. Now, our shared belief in the importance and effectiveness of EDA serves as a very strong foundation to build upon as Congress looks at reauthorization. In addition to significantly increasing the funding authority of the agency, expanding its ability to coordinate federal economic development resources across the government, and providing EDA with robust resources and authorities to expand broadband access and adoption, we also recommend that Congress focus on the key areas of capacity building and disaster recovery while considering EDA reauthorization. Many communities have economic development strategic plans and a list of projects they would undertake, but lack the resources needed to put those plans fully into action. From lacking the pre-development resources to get a project moving, to not having the staff needed to fully execute plans, I can relate to that. Low capacity can have a chilling effect on economic growth. Our regional economies would benefit greatly from resources dedicated to advancing local capacity. Congress should consider a pilot program at EDA that is dedicated to addressing capacity for economic development, both financial and human. We also recommend that Congress establish an EDA Office of Disaster Resilience and Recovery to preserve institutional knowledge and leadership in this space. Enhancing EDA's disaster recovery leadership and resources will help communities prepare for and mitigate the negative economic impacts associated with disasters. This office should have annual appropriations provided and dedicated staff. In cases where a major disaster or emergency has been declared under the Stafford Act, EDA should be required to increase the federal share to 100% of the project cost, waiving all match requirements for any funding appropriated for the purpose of disaster or emergency response. Requiring communities to pay to access disaster funding runs contrary to the goal of funding, which is to help. Not waiving match requirements for disaster funding hurts communities and leaves many out who do not possess the financial and human capacity to access these desperately needed resources. Finally, the events of the past several months have further highlighted the great divide between those who are empowered by economic opportunity and those denied equal access to economic opportunity. So no matter which part of the country we live in, where we're from, how big or how small our community is, we must do more to create opportunities to achieve economic success and security for all people. IEDC is committed to that end, and we look forward to working with EDA in support of that goal. We encourage Congress to consider this imperative as you deliberate over the future of EDA. On behalf of IEDC, our members, my fellow economic developers across the country, thank you so much for your support of EDA and your support of regional economic development efforts at home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to Commissioner Eliason.
Thank you, Chairwoman Titus, Ranking Member Webster, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the invitation to testify before you today on behalf of the EDA reauthorization. I'm the president of the Board of Commissioners here in Athens County and also serve on the board of the National Association of Counties, which represents 3,069 counties in the country. Counties play a major role in financing, administering, and coordinating federal workforce and economic development programs. This includes the EDA, which is a key pillar of the federal, state, and local partnership. EDA programs and grants are the catalyst to spur recovery and innovation in communities across the country, and they are uniquely tailored to meet local and regional needs and conditions. EDA is a program that works on the ground because it's essential to help communities transition from one economy to the next at the local level with local efforts. It is successful because it gives us, the local communities, the tools and the knowledge to help ourselves, and counties strongly believe the program should be continued to be reauthorized and continuously funded. I've seen firsthand the difference the EDA can make in mitigating economic downturns and supporting our efforts to create a stable and diversified economy here in Athens County. For a little bit of background, Athens County is a rural county with a population of around 65,000 residents in southeastern Ohio. We remain heavily weighted from an employment perspective in the following industry sectors: government, accommodations, food services, retail trade, and healthcare. The county is also the home to Ohio University, and the school holds an integral position in the local community and economy, being its largest employer. While the community has been significantly impacted by the downturn in the coal industry, we've experienced growth in other sectors, including energy, manufacturing, healthcare, finance, and construction. Pre-existing challenges to economic development in our county include issues related to broadband, infrastructure and accessibility, workforce and affordable housing, site development, and infrastructure. Athens County has worked to respond to these challenges both before and during the pandemic, and assistance provided by the EDA has been critical to this response. EDA's engagement, financing, and support have been vital to economic development here in Athens County. While we have received assistance from EDA for business attraction, capital construction, and workforce training efforts, perhaps the most critical assistance has come in the form of a grant to help our community transition away from coal to the modern diversification of our economy. Just this past January, the Ohio University Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs was awarded a $2.2 million EDA investment, which has been matched by $550,000 in local funds to accelerate the region's transition from a coal economy to a new initiative called the Resilience Initiative for Southeastern and Eastern Ohio, otherwise known as RISE Ohio. RISE Ohio is a 2-year program led by the Voinovich School alongside with the Buckeye Hills Regional Council and the Ohio Mideastern Governments Association, which is focused on supporting communications in an 18-county region, including Athens County, to make sure an economic transmission to new industries and ensure continued job creation as well as economic growth and diversification. This project will help regional leaders devise strategies to accelerate the economy's transition to new industries and help utilize the region's opportunity zones. Once completed, the project will catalyze a process of strategic recovery and ongoing economic resilience within a critical part of Appalachian Ohio. Without the assistance of EDA, we would not have the resources to pursue these kinds of transformational initiatives and economic developments. EDA investments in our region, coupled with local and state funds, have helped to launch robust economic recovery and job expansion in our community. Counties strongly support the EDA because the program focuses on investments in the nation's most distressed areas, especially those suffering from sudden or severe economic downturns caused by both pre-existing issues and those that have been made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. Counties across the country urge your continued support for the Economic Development Administration, including increased funding and ability for reauthorization to continue assisting with building prosperity from the ground up at the local, regional, and national levels. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of NACO, and we look forward to partnering with Congress to moving forward in conjunction with the EDA, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We appreciate the input from the counties, and we'll be calling on you to help us as we reauthorize this. We'll now go to Mr. Carroll.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Titus, Ranking Member Webster, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to testify today and offer some recommendations on the future of the EDA, especially as it pertains to infrastructure. My name is Dan Carroll. I'm a director at the Milken Institute Center for Financial Markets and serve as adjunct faculty at Georgetown, where I teach infrastructure finance. Formerly, I've served as the senior advisor for infrastructure and energy for Governor Jerry Brown of California. My testimony today will be pretty simple. As Congress wisely considers bold investments to make U.S. infrastructure globally competitive and equitable for all, we must ensure that a small portion of new spending is carved out to incentivize long-term resilience and better infrastructure system performance. Otherwise, without the right carrots, sticks, and technical assistance capacity in place, we won't be able to overcome the nation's multi-trillion-dollar deferred maintenance hole, a hole that existed long before the pandemic, let alone marshal the trillions we will need by 2050 to address climate change and extreme weather. A substantial body of research finds that the key investment Congress can make to move U.S. infrastructure systems from 19th century creakiness to 21st century performance is pre-development funding. Recent reports by the Milken Institute and others highlight the importance of pre-development capital to turn good project plans into shovel-worthy and investment-ready projects. What is pre-development? Pre-development pays for the critical tasks that need to be completed before project construction can begin, such as financial feasibility studies, site acquisition costs, architectural and engineering work, and permitting. This pre-development gap is especially acute for smaller, rural, and historically underserved areas that cannot access the technical assistance they need for broadband and other community-scale infrastructures to get off the ground. Over its history, Congress has used the EDA several times as an accelerator mechanism to address pressing economic and innovation challenges. Now the time has come, in my view, for another mission. EDA should return to its public works roots and jumpstart the next generation of resilient infrastructure projects that thousands of local communities are demanding post-COVID. Shifting America's infrastructure towards resilience and performance will not be easy. We will need a series of strategic investments, beginning with pre-development funding, to deliver better outcomes over the next 3 to 10 years. The payback, however, will far outweigh the pay for. Based on past studies looking at the value of pre-development, we would expect $20 in economic activity to flow from each dollar spent on pre-development. That would mean $300 billion in economic activity could be generated by the $15 billion federal pre-development fund we have proposed. This shift, however, does not have to wait for the final set of infrastructure bills now under discussion, nor for EDA reauthorization later this year. In my written testimony, I suggest specific steps an EDA can take now to kickstart a new pipeline of resilient infrastructure projects in high demand, such as emergency centers and public buildings and rural hospitals with microgrids, broadband, critical water systems, and regionally significant projects across the EDA system. This would not be the first time that EDA has taken on the infrastructure problem at scale. In fact, in the mid-1970s, the agency was appropriated $6 billion in funding, that's $28 billion in today's dollars, to accelerate local and state public works projects to help the country out of recession. How? As this committee assesses the future for EDA, my testimony calls for the creation of regional resilience centers housed in the 6 EDA regions to incubate 21st century whole of government federal coordination from the bottom up across all infrastructure modes. These regional centers would house project finance and tech assistance teams to help communities, EDDs, and others successfully build projects from a focused menu of ready to go and replicable projects that are in high demand in each region based on distinct regional resilience challenges. Many of these recommendations are supported by a diverse set of groups, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Coalition for Green Capital, the IEDC, NATO, and others. My written testimony provides an in-depth discussion of each of these issues, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Again, thank you.
Thank you. It's always good to have an academic, some academic input into anything that we consider. Appreciate that. We'll now move on to member questions. Each member will be recognized for 5 minutes, and I'll start by recognizing myself. Mr. Peterson, you and Mr. Carroll both mentioned this need for pre-development funding. We know there's pencil ready, there's shovel ready. Now we're hearing pre-development, something I think we need to learn more about. I don't know if you want to jump in there, Mr. Peterson, and add to what Mr. Carroll was saying.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you so much for the question. Here's what I know. Every community has a list of potential projects that remain on the shelf because they don't have the initial resources to get the ball rolling. So a dedicated source of pre-development project funding would allow communities to access critical resources that would help them get more of those projects off the shelf. Also, staff capacity is a major issue, likely as much as project funding that could be addressed through this type of a pilot program. It's critically important that communities have access to the resources that can make all those great projects in our comprehensive economic development strategies a reality. So they're not just well-conceived, well-intentioned ideas. So we need to address that space between the plan and getting to the finished product that we all want. Capacity building, in my mind, including pre-development funding, would go a long way.
If I could just add to that, Madam Chair. So we have available more detailed language on the types of pre-development elements that happen after planning has determined the needs. But I think here, and I'm happy to share that with the committee in addition to the written testimony, I think here are just a few examples. There are existing pre-development programs. EPA Brownfields is a perfect example. Only the public sector will remediate a site that can then lead to private development and create a lot of activity. The Tiger Build Now Raise program is another example for large projects where cities like Las Vegas and others can do innovative projects. Both of those programs are always oversubscribed. And I think the other element I would put out there, the committee has done some great work around the FEMA BRIC program, which is a great example of helping communities access funding that's there for resilient infrastructure projects. But there's a $600,000 state cap on technical assistance. So each state only has $600,000 to help communities access money that is there. Grant writers down the line of what Jonas was saying, that is actually cutting off communities from getting funding that's already there. So that's skipping that pre-development step after planning is unrecommended.
Thank you. Very interesting. I'd go back to you, Mr. Peterson, since you are in Las Vegas and have seen the devastating impact of the COVID on travel and tourism. Can you share with us some of the things that y'all are doing that we might consider as we look at reauthorization now that EDA has a special set aside for communities hit by downturns in this area?
Thanks again, Chairwoman Titus, for the question. So in Southern Nevada, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority really takes the lead on all things tourism. But as the Regional Economic Development Group, we very much are strategically aligned and partner on a variety of projects. So here's what I would share. It is absolutely critical that we get America's tourism economy firing on all cylinders again. A lot of damage has been done, and Chairwoman Titus, as you know, we've definitely seen that damage here in Las Vegas. So investments in health and safety infrastructure, investments in tourism infrastructure, I think will prove essential. Flexibility is important here because communities look so different. We definitely appreciate the set aside funds for tourism communities impacted by the pandemic. And I would submit Congress should consider speedy, equitable distribution of those funds to help tourism re-emerge, really in a way that benefits those markets like Las Vegas that have a very recognized brand, but also our small and medium communities, even emerging markets.
you don't have to have the fabulous Las Vegas Strip to be a tourist destination. You can have some place of natural beauty, some historic site. I think someplace in Kansas has the world's largest ball of twine. There's always something somebody wants to see. So we need to encourage it in other places, as well as Las Vegas, certainly. Well, thank you, both of you, for those good answers. We'll now go to Mr. Webster for questions. Unmute.
Okay, is that better? Am I on now? Anyway, Mr. Peterson, you recommended support for the capacity building at a local level, and the chairman also asked about that same thing. Can you talk more about what types of resources are needed and why, and where in the mix of projects or whatever it is do those kick in? Well, do they start early, or what? Give me a little idea about that.
Yeah, great question. Again, thank you. I think capacity building is critically important. Let me give you a very specific example, and that would be in my organization, the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance. As a result of the pandemic, we've seen cuts to some of our funding sources, and as a result, to balance our budget, we've had to pull back in some areas, including operations staff. So I think there is very much a need for capacity building in terms of staff for operations that will allow economic development organizations to make more projects become a reality. And again, I can't emphasize enough that so many communities across the country have incredible comprehensive economic development strategies where I think we need the help in capacity building, some of that pre-development project funding to better scope out projects, get the ball rolling, and then capacity building for staff and resources directly to EDOs to help them make those projects become a reality.
Okay, Mr. Carroll, along that same lines, I think it seems like I'm hearing the same thing, but maybe it's not. Can you give some examples of why pre-development support is mentioned, and how does that differ from what we just talked about?
Sure. So, and I think as an engineer, Representative Webster, you can certainly understand. There's that initial phase of what outcomes do we need to buy in terms of the size of a wastewater treatment plant or any level of service. And then there's how do you actually make the project happen? And those steps to decide what technology, what design, where you're going to do it, assembling the land, those are all the things that have to happen before a municipal bond deal is done, before a public-private partnership is done, or before even a grant is gotten. So that's, a good example, I think, would be in Northern California. There's the Blue Rancheria microgrid center that was built in 2018. This is a new technology to use microgrids in a community center. It was a $6.2 million deal. At least $1.5 million was pre-development to do something that now thousands of communities want. Is there a small hospital, a school building, a place to go where you can charge your phone and sleep after the next flood, fire, or alien invasion? That's new technology that needs certain type of expertise. And same really with broadband, because there's different sizes of broadband deals that I think we could stretch broadband investment by using pre-development to make sure that we have here are the different tiers of projects that you can do. So
I got that, and but you listed off several places where money is needed, but there's one thing about applying for a grant, going through a process, getting that. On the other hand, there are a couple of places along the way, including what we're doing here, where speed wins. So how do you balance that? Sometimes you can't have enough time to do maybe pre-development or whatever you want to call it. Or is it that we're not starting soon enough?
Well, in my full written testimony, what I'm identifying is right now, infrastructure in the US, our $2 trillion deferred maintenance gap is a procurement problem. We buy the low cost capital bid with no plan to maintain it. I've been doing that for decades across red and blue states. And I think
we're great at that.
Excuse me?
We're great at that.
Yeah. And so if we could use the pre-development carrot as a way to incentivize communities to think, what's the life cycle outcomes that we want to buy in terms of vehicle miles traveled or broadband delivered, I think that's where EDA could play a real innovative role as kind of an initial startup engine to think about this life cycle resilience, particularly for post-COVID infrastructure needs in some categories that everyone's demanding at high scale, including broadband.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you. We'll go to Ms. Norton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for Mr. Peterson. As you know, Mr. Peterson, communities taking advantage of EDA's planning resources often lack the human and the financial resources to implement those plans. How would the pilot program, I was interested in the notion you indicated of a pilot program, how would that benefit economic developers?
Thank you so much for the question. I think it goes, the concept of the pilot program that we have in mind goes to exactly what you said, the financial, but also the human needs of organizations to build capacity with economic development groups in a variety of ways. And once again, flexibility I think is important here, but designed around getting more of those projects that are scoped out, are in those great plans to fruition. So operations, project funding, staffing, and staffing that has that has multiple years to see projects to fruition, I think is important. Well, I can speak for my organization. When we look at grants, we don't need them to last forever, but we do need a time horizon that allows us to staff up, implement, and staff back down without disrupting the organization. So those are the areas that we see are critically important. Thank you.
I think that if that pilot program was spread across the board, it would be very helpful. Mr. Peterson, may I ask yet another question? You're in a position to address racial and socioeconomic inequality. And you described that in your testimony. Could you elaborate as to how EDA in particular can provide more opportunities to those who are underserved?
Yeah, another excellent question. Thank you. And I will share on IEDC, on behalf of IEDC, this is an issue that's near and dear to our heart. So we have, built equity as a priority into our programs, our services, our planning, everything we do as an organization. From an EDA point of view, I appreciate the efforts that are already underway to look at underserved communities. I love the idea of doing even more to get the word out. I think it amazes me how often parts of our community don't know about the great resources already available through EDA. So I think more can be done there. And then I think we need to take a systematic look at how we prioritize projects to make sure we're hitting the right areas that address that critically important equality issue.
Thank you very much. I have a special interest in climate change. And Mr. Carroll, I have a question for you. Climate resiliency is a key goal of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on which I serve. In your testimony, you illustrate how EDA in particular can play a role in that. Why is it important for EDA to be involved in the fight against climate change. What does it bring to the table? What does EDA bring to the table that other agencies and funding sources lack or do not?
Well, I would thank you very much for the question. I guess I would answer it in two ways. One, what we're seeing on the ground is if you're a local or state official, it's the integration of modes, so that there's a bunch of great federal programs. Sometimes they're siloed, and if you're a local official trying to put together and 25 sources of capital, it's super hard. That's one of the skill sets that Jonas Peterson was talking about that's missing. And so EDA, because it is multimodal, is able to help with that. I mean, I mentioned the example of really what we're hearing from many communities around the country is they want an emergency microgrid public building. Is it a library? Is it a school? It is a rural health center? Does it involve broadband? It's all those things. And so we are seeing a lot of new types of community scale projects, energy efficient wastewater. We have all these wastewater facilities that are usually the largest energy user, built in the 1970s. There's dams and levees, waste to value. So EDA has this regional footprint, which is great. We have regional innovation strategies they've developed. And as they look and scan for I sort of see this as EDA can create a food truck offering, these are the 6 types of projects in highest demand, and we can help you with those, rather than, particularly with the ARPA money, the rescue plan money, to be able to spend that out in the next 18 months is not going to, looking at thousands of projects, I don't think would be as efficient.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, we're hearing from these answers what we heard from the secretary earlier, and reinforces that need for maybe some of us to get staff to come out and do roundtables or town halls in our district to inform some of these communities about just what is available. We'll now go to Mr. Guest.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Hawkins, I want to speak with you about the importance of rural broadband. I know that is contained within the essence of your report. You say in there that Farm Bureau has continued to advocate for significant investment to support broadband development in rural communities. Then you go to list out very eloquently that the coronavirus pandemic has exacerbated and made more apparent the need for rural broadband in rural communities as employees shifted to working from home, school districts closed and resorted to distance learning platforms, and patients sought healthcare through telemedicine platforms. Then you go on to say farmers and ranchers depend on broadband just as they do highways, railways, and waterways to ship food, fuel, and fiber across the country and around the world. Many of the latest yield maximizing farming techniques require broadband connection for data collection, and analysts perform both on the farm and in remote data centers. Then lastly, you say, however, 29% of US farms have no, and again, you say no access to internet. And so, Mr. Hawkins, if you will, for just a moment, could you please expand on, again, how important broadband infrastructure is to the agriculture and ag industry suppliers, especially how they relate to rural, remote communities? And then I'll also speak, if you will, about what Congress can do to expand the availability of broadband to rural America.
Well, thank you, Congressman, for the question. I would say one of our members summed it up best for me the other day when he described broadband as the invisible thread that connects agriculture, our rural communities, and our urban centers. It truly is key as we talk about economic revitalization across rural America. And so if we've learned anything as a result of the pandemic, we saw several things. In our communities, especially my hometown of 1,100 people, we saw very quickly that while we have service, the need is great. The service that we have for high-speed internet essentially goes from the east to the west city limits of Appleton. And for our farm families that live outside of town, data plans were quickly getting used up on cell phones as families scrambled to try to help their kids adjust to the new way of life and get through school. And so quickly we learned just yet again, just at the home level, how important it is to keeping things going from an education standpoint. In our community and in our county, we have roughly about 17% poverty. And we do have a real issue with substance abuse. And as we talk about, as a health community, as we talk about telemedicine, I mentioned in my testimony that unreliable internet is the biggest impediment for us to utilizing telemedicine. And the number one service we need is access to mental health services, followed by cardiac services. So it's not like we can't find a provider. It's being able to do it via the internet in a reliable fashion. And then finally, as we think about the farm gate, when we saw supply chains break down during COVID, and when for the first time some Americans went to a grocery store and saw a near empty meat case, it led everyone to be reminded that they depend on us as farmers and ranchers 3 times a day at least, right? And so I can assure you that the kink in the supply chain wasn't at the farm gate. We had plenty of product. We had plenty of animals. We had plenty of crops. The issue is at the processing side. But what we learned is that we have farmers who are willing to adjust, to use the internet, and to reach consumers directly. That's why we started a meat processor database within our Missouri Farm Bureau website so that our farmers could connect with consumers and vice versa. So time and time again, we see opportunities with basic broadband service. And as we think about the future of agriculture, what we don't know, we don't know. There are farmers who have access to high-speed internet who are clearly at the head of the curve in terms of adopting cutting-edge technology. Then you have folks like my grandfather growing up that still use the spiral-bound shirt pocket notebook that would do his data collection in that notebook and then crunch the numbers on back of a Post Toasties box. So we span everything in agriculture, and that's what truly makes us so incredibly diverse as well as resilient. So bottom line, though, as we talk about bringing home the next generation to our communities and to agriculture, high-speed internet is critical, absolutely critical to agriculture, to entrepreneurship, to healthcare, to education. It is that thread of life that our rural communities need.
Mr. Hawkins, thank you so much for being with us today. And please pass along my thanks to all the farmers, particularly those related to Farm Bureau that work so hard every day to feed America. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Commissioner, you mentioned the internet in your comments. Do you want to weigh in on this question?
One of the things that is important to understand is that the FCC needs to modernize its data collection. So when you look at the maps that are being used, it's important to understand that using census block is not a good way to figure out where the service areas are. And we're putting a lot of money out there for broadband development, and we have to make sure that we implement it in a manner where it actually goes to the best service. There's been a lot of restrictions by states to local development of the broadband service. So it's something that we have to work from our side to try to get those of us that don't have providers that are not investing in the local areas, especially the rural areas, because they're not as financially profitable to be able to get those. So there's a lot of work to be done. But as we go through the process of implementing the monies, it's important to make sure that the money actually gets built and it gets used and done, because it's not only accessibility, but affordability. So there's 2 sides to that coin when it comes to development of rural broadband. So it's important to understand. We did a study here in our Buckeye Hills Rural Council region, and it turned out it was going to be $8 billion to get fiber to all the homes, because we're in a hilly area, so you can't use satellite and you can't use some of the other things out there that are available in areas that have much more line of sight availability. So it's really an expensive proposition. So we have to make sure we take a look at that. And I can tell you lots of stories about kids having to go to McDonald's and hi-fi hotspots here in our county to try and get their work done. So they're falling behind. And that happens in a lot of rural areas because they don't have the accessibility.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Gonzalez-Colon? Is she still with us? Well, while we wait for her, I would just go back and ask Ms. Cooper. You mentioned the Sprint grant that you got with a university campus there in your area. Could you talk a little bit more about your relationship with the university and how the university can help with economic development administration and that whole kind of scenario?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. We are very fortunate to have Northern Kentucky University as not only a great educational institution, but a great partner in our region. I had mentioned the data analytics. We have an incredible economic data center there that our businesses rely on, that we rely on so that we can make proper decisions. Local government, small businesses, and our large businesses all partner together with this university to try and not only address the needs of our region as a whole, but individual business issues that may come up so that they can grow and develop. The entrepreneurship piece of it is huge. It's going to be an incubator for entrepreneurs where they can come and not only, help develop their project, but also take that idea and take it to commercialization. And those of you who work with entrepreneurs know that that is always a step that folks struggle with. They have the idea, they know what they want to do, but having that support system around them and having that ability to take that project to commercialization is something that's key, and it often keeps a great idea and a great entrepreneur from becoming a success story. So we're really excited about this opportunity, and this EDA investment will help us work with these folks through our revolving loan fund. Once they get these ideas, we can take them, work with them with their business plans, and take them to that next step. So it's really exciting.
It sounds like it. I've talked to the economic development folks here at UNLV, and they're working on something similar with the incubator and then the accelerator, I think they called it. You get the idea and then push it out there, then it becomes part of the business world. So it really can make a difference. So thank you for that. Any further questions from any of the members? Mr. Webster? We're good? Well, I guess.
I was just saying I'm good. It's
okay.
Great hearing.
Well, thank you all very much. I think it has been a good hearing. We've got some good information to use, and we're all excited on both sides of the aisle about reauthorizing the EDA, and we have seen what kind of good work it can do in the time of a disaster, or just in sponsoring and helping us to develop when times are good. So thank you. Your comments have been very helpful. I'll now ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record hearing. Without objection, so ordered. And so we will be talking to you all again, I'm sure, as we move forward with this effort. And now the subcommittee stands adjourned.